Welcome back to Calder Park Thunderdome, the first 50-lapper for the AUSCARs about to take place. Brad Jones, the Castrol, number 8 car, the Commodore, who sits on pole position today with John Faulkner on the outside of the front row. Row number 2 made up of Marshall J. Brewer and Bruce Williams. In the third row, Grant Munday and Gary Rogers. Then it's Terry Wyhoon and Mark Seaton. From position number 9, Richard Howe and Ken James. From 11, Rodney Jane. And from 12, it's Rod Wilson. 24 starters. As the cars come off turn number 4, down past the start-finishing line, behind the Ford pace cars. Once again, this race to determine starting positions for the 50-lap AUSCAR final this afternoon. And Brad Jones, very much the man of the moment in the Castrol Commodore. And I guess this is going to be hard work, Brad.
Well, this is an important one because I want to stay away from any accidents and run round at the front if I can. So there's plenty of people very close behind me. So yeah, it's going to be a real tight one.
No pit stops to worry about, and 50 laps. I guess it's a case of go as hard as you can and conserve at the same time.
Yeah, I'm going to try taking off from third in the restart this time, so that'll be quite interesting. I hope it works all right.
All right, son, I'll let you get to it.
See ya.
Okay, Brad Jones says see ya. The pace cars go to the pits, and the green comes out. And it's Joan who streets them down the front straight with Faulkner running in second. Marshall Brewer up on the inside looking for a show at second and dives down. Oh, they got one sideways back behind. Terry Wyhoon trying to catch it. Goes up high against the wall. Superb effort that from young Wyhoon.
Tremendous save from Terry Wyhoon. He got way out of shape there. Looked like he was heading for the concrete wall with the whole field coming down on top of him. But he's gathered it up well done. Meanwhile, out at the front, Brad Jones in his customary position. First place as they come across for the first lap. He said just in that little chat on the race cam he wants to get away from the pack so he keeps the car clean for the major point scoring race later on this afternoon.
Here's two Fords, Mark having a shot. And that, of course, is Gary Rogers on the inside. Mark Seaton the outside as they come off turn number 2 now, down the back straight.
Mark Seaton blew an engine yesterday. He's got a new engine in today, but it's the old spare. It's a bit down on horsepower compared to his gun engine, which unfortunately blew up. So Mark's going to be struggling all day. And one of the few Fords in the field. Gary Rogers 2 cars ahead of him in the latest EB model Falcon.
Rogers doing a good job, in fact, starting to close it up. Bruce Williams there in the number 9 car. Mark Seaton right behind him. Next is Grant Munday. They've opened up a huge break over the rest of the field.
There's our race leader, Brad Jones, in the distinctive black Castrol Commodore VN. Marshall J. Brewer in second place. And John Faulkner, the big improver in AUSCAR this year. He's already won 2 rounds of the series. He's come from nowhere to be a really competitive push in this category. But right behind him, first of the late model Falcons, the Falcon EB of Gary Rogers.
Young Bradley makes this look all so easy, and it really isn't. I mean, the cars are running absolute flat chat. And if that looks slow to you at home, keep in mind he's approaching the turns at about 200 kilometres an hour. There's very little lift off just to steady the car. Just a dab of the brakes to keep it nice and steady and rock hard for the turns, and then out by the wall.
Here's the battle for 5th, 6th and 7th. Mark Seaton hanging on to the top 6. The big Falcon, the XF, she's a bit long in the tooth. That car's been around for a long time now, but still packs a mighty punch. 351 cubic inch Cleveland V8, much bigger than the Commodores, but quite hard on tyres over a long race distance. So this 50-lap format will suit him just fine.
We're following Bruce Williams, sorry Mark, with Mark Seaton right behind him. Grant Munday is the next one on the queue as they come down past the terraces here at Thunderdome, with young Bradley Jones of Albury leading down into turn number 2, the exit of that corner now. Marshall J. Brewer sits back behind him by about 3 or 4 car lengths. And the Castrol Commodore really running strongly, and we're following several dices in the pack. This is just one of them as they come down the back straight.
This is the battle for the top 10, 8th, 9th and 10th. And that man in front in the Arjip Commodore, Ken James, is running second in the AUSCAR title, so he's going to be hoping he can keep everything in shape for the big one this afternoon. Had a very consistent run throughout the series this year. Superb looking car. Was third in round 1, fifth in round 2, fourth again in round 3. Didn't run too well at Surface Paradise. There's car 11, Richard Howe, coming into the pits. This won't be good for Richard.
No, that's not a good thing to happen, to have to pit in the early laps in the bad dag entry, going down the back straight.
Qualified 9th, meanwhile back in the race.
Looks like Todd Wanless, the number 1 car, another one of the Wanless boys. Trailing. Big crowd in here at Calder Park Thunderdome.
Mark Seaton still hanging off there in 6th position behind Bruce Williams and the Bendix Commodore.
So I think it was Grand Monday just got a little taily coming out of the turn 2 onto the back straight last time. Well, Seaton is throwing everything he possibly can at Bruce Williams, but just doesn't seem to be able to pick him up. There's not much he can do with him because Williams is flat to the boards, and there's Steve Harrington, number 16.
Steve had to start from the rear of the grid. Couldn't come up with the sponsorship money to run the car. It came through at the 11th hour, so he had to start the race from right back, and he's already in position 16. Steve's shown himself a real match for Brad Jones in the earlier rounds of the AUSCAR Championship this year. He's run into financial problems as we go inside with Castrol race cam. That's inside Brad Jones' Commodore VN. Brad leading the race, looks reasonably comfortable, but Marshall Brewer is right on his hammer. Marshall very brave under brakes, as we've seen throughout the championship, and he'll be keeping Bradley honest in this qualifying heat, make no mistake.
That'll give you an indication too just how much these cars do jump around on the circuit here at Calder. On television, as we take the shots going down the back straight, it looks so smooth, but there are indentations in the racetrack, and they really do a lot of bumping and a lot of buffeting during a race here. Quite physical, and every lap's got to be turned at somewhere between 196 and 200 clicks.
So back at the front, Bradley Jones still holding on to the lead. Marshall Brewer 3 or 4 car lengths behind him. They've opened up quite a gap to third and fourth. Sorry, John Faulkner in third, and Gary Rogers still hanging on there in the new Falcon.
Tell you what you are going to see here in a second. You'll see Brad Jones come into traffic, and it'll give you a good indication how smooth he is. He's carrying our Castrol race cam as he comes down the front straight through the tri-oval. That's straight round the outside. Now he's coming up on a group of cars. Watch the way he threads his way through these cars. We take the Castrol race cam as Brad comes off turn 2. Out by the wall now. Setting in the draft, he'll switch. Now he's going to stay the outside as he goes by 5 on the outside.
Superb pictures from the race cam, boys, and listen to the effects. That engine revving hard as Bradley rounds up the tail enders. Goes to the outside. Marshall Brewer, because of that traffic, Bradley had to back off just a fraction. Marshall gets right up, much closer to him now.
Now Marshall Brewer's been able to make up probably 4 or 5 car lengths because Brad just had to balk a little and look for those cars to sort themselves out. That gave Brewer on the outside a chance to run right up on his tailpipe, and that's exactly what he's done. He'll switch to the inside now. Not enough room there. Brad will be watching him in the mirrors. They've already reeled off just on 13 laps of 50. This will sort out the qualifying positions for the 50-lap final as Brad Jones goes after his 3rd successive AUSCAR crown.
He really is the AUSCAR king. He's got the setup, builds the right cars, he's got good backup, very slick pit crew work when he has to come in for the tyre changes.
Well, his brother Kim does a fabulous job preparing the car with Bradley. Their dad is a very keen supporter of his sons and their involvement with racing.
Marshall gets held up a fraction just on the outside of that slower car. This is where the real skill comes into it. This is where Brad is so strong as he's picked his way through the slower cars. So Marshall Brewer hangs on in 2nd place. I won't see too many desperates, I don't think, in this qualifying heat. These guys want to get through this without a scratch.
Well, they've run off 14 laps. Commodores 1, 2, 3. Brad Jones the leader from Marshall Brewer, then John Faulkner the first of the Fords, up into 4th now with Gary Rogers, the Valvoline entry. 2nd view of the Castrol race cam, this time from the front bumper of the Castrol Commodore. This is fabulous stuff as he comes down into turn number 1. You see the track just dip away here. He'll drop down below the white line. He'll come onto the back straight out via the wall.
And here the revs just jump just a fraction. There's a big bump as they come off turn 2, and the cars just about hit the rev limiter as they come out of there.
And Brad setting the car up in front for a pass. And he'll swing to the outside as they come down through the tri-oval. A little kink to the right now.
Tremendous sound of that 5-litre Holden V8, revving to about 6,200 RPM on the steep banks of the Thunderdome. Backs off, gets back on the power, and this is where these engines have got to produce a lot of torque to get these cars out of these turns. Bradley's really on a roll. Fantastic pictures from our race cam boys.
Certainly are. So Brad Jones, the Castrol Commodore, continues to lead this 50-lap segment of the Goodyear National AUSCAR Championship this afternoon at Calder Park Thunderdome.
So Brad's opened up. He's just maintaining that gap with Marshall. And Gary Rogers, meanwhile, has taken third place from John Faulkner. We go inside, and there is the man in his office, Brad Jones, hard at work in the Castrol Commodore. And there we are, Gary Rogers in the Falcon. This is a good showing from the Ford boys. We haven't seen a late model Falcon produce this sort of competitiveness since I think Greg Hansford was running the SVO car a number of seasons back. It's good to see the Fords back, and Gary Rogers doing a tremendous job.
This is what the fans come to see at Calder Thunderdome. That's the battle of the V8s, Ford and Holden, side by side. This augurs well for the future. As Mark said, they've been chasing a competitive current model Ford to run with the Commodores here on the oval. They seem to have found it, and this is a battle royal between Gary Rogers and the Valvoline Ford, and John Faulkner cutting it in very, very deep indeed. Faulkner may have been passed by Rogers, but he hasn't given up the chase. He wants that second spot or third spot back again.
Here he comes through the slower traffic. Faulkner's not going to let him go. He's going to sit in the draft. These cars pretty evenly matched. And these two have been the big improvers in the last two rounds of the AUSCAR Championship. I know that Gary up at Surfers Paradise in the Indy Grand Prix support race qualified third and finished second, and that really stunned a lot of the AUSCAR fans. They were really amazed to see how competitive the Falcon is and how quickly it's come on stream.
Well, it's Ford versus Holden. The warfare continues at Calder Park Thunderdome. Brad Jones in a Commodore leads from Marshall Brewer's Commodore, and Gary Rogers in that Ford EB. And we'll be back at Thunderdome in just a second. 20 of 50 laps completed at Calder Thunderdome as Brad Jones continues to lead Marshall Brewer, and Gary Rogers in the Ford EV Valvoline car that come beneath our camera through the tri-oval out by the wall, still with a lot of cars to pass, a lot of lap cars running havoc for the front markers today. And I'll tell you, at the head of the pack, Brad Jones still has that lead, but it's getting narrower and narrower as Marshall Brewer closes up behind him.
There is Marshall holding station. He hasn't really been able to close up much more than this. A couple of times Brad's been held up in traffic, had to back off a bit. Marshall's picked up a couple of car lengths, but on a clear road, Brad's holding him.
That's the battle for the lead. First, second, then it's back to Gary Rogers and John Faulkner.
4-second gap to the Falcon there, so these two having their own battle. Gary fending off John Faulkner behind these two. Bradley still picking his way through the traffic.
Bruce Williams fifth, followed then by Mark Seaton, Ken James, Grant Munday, Terry Wyhoon and Mark Smedley. They round out the 10.
Tremendously noisy inside these race cars. These aren't like your road car with your insulation and all your interior. It's just raw metal, and the noise going through these cars is just unbelievable.
That's the gap. First over second, turn two, as they work the back straight. Still a lap or so shy of the halfway mark in this qualifier for the Yellow Terror 200 trophy today at Calder Thunderdome.
Brad Jones, 31-year-old king of AUSCAR, as he's become known, and quite rightly so, twice AUSCAR champion. And there's the man who tried to wrest the crown from him this year, Steve Harrington, car 16, the Bob Jane T-Mart's entry. Another beautifully prepared car, built by Steve himself, actually. Put in some very competitive runs in the opening rounds of the championship, actually won the opening round and finished second. But since then he's come a bit unglued in the Fortune Stakes. But he's here back running in the final today. And remind you that he started from the rear of the grid. He's slowly pulling his way through the positions. Got up to 16th at a very early stage. So continuing his progress through the grid, Steve Harrington.
Steve, as you've already detailed, a very solid performer in this AUSCAR class. Has the runs on the board, and I'll tell you what, he's been kept fairly busy today in traffic. There's been plenty of it. There's Richard Howe in the number 11 car going through. He has already made a pit stop. But back on the racetrack as we pick up on Gary Rogers, the Valvoline EV Ford running back there in third behind Bradley Jones and Marshall J. Brewer.
It's quite interesting. A lot of these guys will also be checking out the others' race speed and seeing how well their cars are working. It's a good chance to see how things are going to be in the final today. So John Faulkner just hanging in there behind the Falcon, checking the speed of this car. Wow! And there goes Marshall Brewer. Bang! And look, there's a nasty star in the front of the laminated screen on the Castrol Commodore. Brad's copped a rock or something's hit the screen there. That shouldn't affect him too much being a laminated screen, but the big news there, as you saw, Marshall Brewer just stormed through under brakes as they came into turn 4. So Bradley has been disposed.
Well, he has for a while.
Whether
he'll put the pressure back on Brewer, and he'll just sit in Brewer's draft, and they'll come up on some slower cars, and he'll probably repay the favour. But it was a very, very good and very decisive inside snap for the lead.
So Marshall has a turn at the front. And there's car 18, Mark Smedley, slowly rolling down to pit lane. That's a disappointment for him. Meanwhile, back at the leaders, here we are inside Brad Jones' Castrol Commodore once again. Gets a good look at Marshall Brewer. The bumps, they come out onto the back straight. Car 5 in the pits as well.
So a pit stop down there.
Hector Gutierrez.
Yes, poor Hector had problems. That's the second engine for the Gutierrez team over the weekend, unsponsored. He's done his best to be back on in race trim today, but something's obviously amiss there. He's in the pits.
So Marshall J. Brewer makes a break on Brad Jones. Marshall, a 35-year-old, lives in Melbourne, runs the fast track racing driver school down here at Calder, which gives people a chance to get into one of these AUSCAR race cars and do some laps around here. Very popular sort of driving school, and certainly beneficial for a lot of guys who want to get involved in this exciting category of racing.
And not overly expensive either, and that's the good thing. I mean, some of these schools were reasonably priced, but the fast track school, and particularly based here in Melbourne, has given an opportunity for quite a few drivers to come into the AUSCAR class.
The gap back to third place. Here's Marshall in first. The gap back to third is Gary Rogers, still in third place, about 4.5 seconds. One's come unglued. Who's that? See the number on him. Car 30.
He got out of it.
It was a pretty good save. Lloyd McDonald. He's going to come into the pits for a check. No, he's continuing. So everything seems to be okay there for Lloyd.
He's got those new flat spotted Stagecoach tyres on at the stage.
It'll give him a nice vibration, I'm sure.
So 19 laps remain now in the first 50 lapper this afternoon. There's our race leader, Marshall J. Brewer, in the fast track Commodore. And given that we've got almost perfect weather here today, Mark, it is a pleasure to see these type of cars back on a place where they look a lot more comfortable. I'm afraid I'm not a devotee of making demolition derby cars out of them at some of the road courses and surface in particular. I just think they've paid an awful penalty, and maybe it needs a bit of a rethink because the cars aren't suited for that track, but here they can thrill a huge crowd, and they're wound up on a string and accelerating and doing 200 kilometres an hour. There's 3 and 4 wide passing. I mean, there's no greater spectacle in competitive motorsport in Australia today. And to see them flung around on a tiny little road course playing second fiddle to the Indy cars in the rain, and they're not comfortable in the rain, the NASCAR certainly aren't. Maybe that needs a bit of a rethink. That's from the purist to me, the oval track purist.
Meanwhile, the battle for 5th and 6th continues. Bruce Williams holding station ahead of Mark Seaton. Mark's looking reasonably comfortable running out at this sort of pace. Has had some engine problems earlier in the weekend.
Well, there's Bruce Williams going through. Mark Seaton right behind him. He was a bit of a flyer in the early part of the series. Pole and able to run the legs off the Commodores, but it hasn't worked out that way today.
He certainly does it tough. There's not a lot of money involved in this racing. It's sort of second string effort. Certainly doesn't have a lot of money to spend on engines and transmissions. So he does it on a shoestring. And certainly a guy with a lot of driving ability, even if he hasn't got the money to put the sort of package together that he'd like. Bruce Williams there in the Bendix distinctive green Commodore as they sweep onto turn 4. Beautifully presented car.
15 laps to go, Mark, for this first 50-lap leg. The Yellow Terror 200, which is in fact the grand final day of the Goodyear AUSCAR Series, the national championships at Calder Thunderdome.
It's certainly going to be interesting to see the final. I don't know whether these guys are holding station or they're deliberately being cautious, because the big point scoring race is yet to come. That'll be interesting to see.
Well, if Brad's car is comfortable, he can probably let Marshall think that he's got the edge on him. I don't really know, but Marshall looks good. He's gone very wide to pass a couple of these slower cars. Look at Jones just pegging away at the inside here as they come down the back straight.
Well, we've had one loose. 50 Grant Monday, the guy who was doing so strongly. Car 7 there, that's Rodney Jane.
Well, Grant, I think, has got out of that reasonably well. I'm not quite sure about young Rodney Jane.
Yellow flags are out. Rodney's still stuck at the bottom of the banking there. So, that's a bit of bad luck for Marshall Brewer, because that'll bunch the field right up, put Bradley Jones right back on the tail. As you can see, it
was Monday that was around sideways, and young Rodney Jane actually got it around just to miss contact.
Grant just kissed the wall with the back of the Commodore there, but doesn't look too severe.
Brad Jones, let's see if he's held something special for this 12-lap sprint for the first 50 here at Calder this afternoon. There he is, tucked in on the outside of the second row. Marshall Brewer gets away nicely, and maybe out-accelerated Bradley quite strongly, but I tell you, the one who's making the big run is Ken James.
And we've got Bruce Williams. Oh, Terry Wyhoon's gone into the wall as well. Bruce Williams just limping down. So there's a few cars off. The yellows have come out straight away.
So there was a touch in the wall from Terry Wyhoon. There he is on the infield. Keeping in mind, Terry at the start of this race in the first turn got the thing as loose as Mother Goose and was able to bring it back under control. Let's have a look and see what happened. It was in the background here coming in for the start. There's Wyhoon. I think he gets a hit. He does from behind. That drags the front round into the wall. So that was
Steve Harrington.
Could have been. Yeah, he's got no control over it there, and it's heading off. So he did absolutely get drilled in the back coming in for the start. And there they go. Down to the right. They bring them in for the green flag restart. And with 8 to go, it's Marshall Brewer gets away smartly. Brad Jones in second spot. The Castrol Commodore as they go down to the bottom turn. Here's Gary Rogers coming out of the field in the Falcon Ford V8. He's up to third now as they come down the back straight, and you get the impression that Brad Jones sits in the raft now of the 69 Marshall Brewer car.
Ken James taps into fourth position. Important position for him to get up on the grid. He's the guy who's running second in the championship so far. The yellow Commodore just out of screen. Mark Seaton behind him. So the battle's on back at the front, as you heard Bradley say in the yellow caution period there. He thinks Marshall is pretty even on race speed, so Brad is going to have to work pretty hard here. I'll tell you what, if Marshall can beat Brad, this will make a bit of history. It's the first time he's beat Jones, as we take race cam and a perfect view of Marshall Brewer's fast track Commodore along the back straight. Hard under brakes, they dip down there. Turn 3, back on the gas. Turn 4, back onto the main straight as they come under a camera position. Brewer, Jones.
And Gary Rogers in the Falcon V8 is not too far back behind them.
And Gary's actually right with them. He's just closed up an enormous amount of time in that opening lap.
Now Bradley comes down the inside this time to mount the challenge on Marshall Brewer. Brewer is outside by the wall. Here comes Jones up in the Castrol Commodore, passes him again and retakes the lead. Good driving that from Jones.
Had a tremendous run out of turn 2. So Marshall goes back 1. And Gary Rogers, as Mike said, right there with the leading 2 Commodores.
It's a great performance from Gary Rogers for Ford and for Commodore. The Holden versus Ford warfare at Calder Park Thunderdome.
So
4 laps remain.
Those 3 there. Then we've got another battle behind them. 4th, 5th and 6th. Ken James, Mark Seaton and John Faulkner tapping onto the back. Here's Gary Rogers, the new EB Falcon with the 302 Ford V8. And there's our battle for 4th, 5th and 6th. Ken James in the Argyp Commodore. Now, if he can maintain 4th position, that'll give him the outside of the 2nd row for the start of the points race, and that'll be good for him.
Mark Seaton behind him, and then, of course, we have John Faulkner. That's the order as they go across the line. They've got 3 laps still to run in this race this afternoon. Brad Jones getting away smartly now. He's opened up a big gap over Marshall Brewer, but I'll tell you what, Gary Rogers is all over Brewer's car, getting closer and closer as they come down the back straight up into turn number 3.
This is a tremendous run from Rogers. He took it by the neck and went out and developed the Falcon when everyone else was running Commodores. Very expensive exercise, very time-consuming developing a new car, but he's done it. And the car looks tremendously strong here in the final laps of this opening heat.
Engine sounds a treat as they go down into turn number 1. Gary went in there very, very deep indeed. Comes out onto the back straight, still trying to pull that gap back over Marshall Brewer. Brad Jones, meanwhile, has got the wind in his face and he's long gone. Here's the scrap going with Ken James and Faulkner as they come around the top turn. Nothing between them. Side by side off the 4th turn across the strike. 1 lap to go for Brad Jones.
Door handle to door handle. Look at these two. John Faulkner on the inside of Ken James. John was worried. This is the first time he's been able to get up and run hammer and tongs with these leading guys in AUSCAR. He didn't know how they were going to race, but boy, he's getting a good taste of it now. Look at this. Ken James hangs on just half a car length in front, but Faulkner will have a nice line as they come under brakes for turn 3.
Great stuff that they're trying to resolve that. In the meantime, Brad Jones comes off the final corner. They've got the checkered flag ready, and here he comes, the Castrol GP Commodore, and it's Bradley Jones first to the line, second going to 69.
The battle for 4th. Oh, very close, but Ken James had it.
He got it right on the line.
Tremendous comeback from John Faulkner in the last few laps of that heat.
Well, that's what you call competitive motor racing. Goes back to what I said a little earlier about getting onto a soapbox. When these guys get loose on the oval here, they're 100% better show, or 1,000% better show than trying to make all those compromises when they get off the oval. Let's check them out on the race score for you. Congratulations to Brad Jones. Well done, son. And the Castrol Commodore, Marshall J. Brewer finished in 2nd. Gary Rogers, what a performance in the Valvoline Falcon. 4th was Kenny James. And 5th, John Faulkner. We'll be back at Thunderdome in just a tick.